Hey there, I'm Finn. Welcome to my very first Magic the Gathering Commander video. Let's get started. Today's video is going to be a discussion of current rules in Commander for color identity and hybrid rules, and why some people think they should be changed and some others don't. Let's define our terms.
Color identity.
Color identity, according to the Glossary of Comprehensive Rules, is defined as
a set of colors that determines what cards may be included in a deck for the Commander Casual variant.
So, color identity is exclusive to the Commander, but what determines the identity? Well, if you look at the full rules, the exact wording is
the color identity of a card is the color or colors of any mana symbol in that card's mana cost or rules text, plus any colors defined by its characteristic defining abilities or color indicator.
So here's a quick example. Stormcrow has a blue color identity because it only has its blue mana symbol, but Warper Warrior has a blue symbol and a red symbol, so its color identity is red-blue. Pretty simple, right? Well, no. There's some strange exceptions here and there that affect how decks can be constructed.
Rules confusion.
Okay. When I first got into Commander, there are some deck building habits I had to later unlearn in order to follow the color identity rules. One of those was putting off-color transform cards into the wrong decks. I found out that, apparently, you can't put Westfell Abbey into a non-black deck. This is because when it flips from your guys killing themselves, the colorless church becomes a black creature. I found this confusing because a very similar card called Dark Depths can be played in any deck. Any deck can break the ice and summon goddamn Cthulhu, but only black decks can summon Satan. What the F is this? Well, the difference is, tokens don't account for a card's color identity, but its faces do. Kinda weird, right? Another thing I've always found confusing is Devoid. See this chick? You think she's red, right? Well, you're wrong. Devoid says she's colorless. Just kidding! The red mana symbol says her identity is still red. See this guy? His mana cost will make you think he's colorless. Well, you're wrong. Because his text says he's all colors, and that's it. In this instance, the mana symbols are the wrong part. So you can't even trust the colors of the card itself to figure out a card's color identity. The last confusing rule I like to call the extort rule. That is, if a mana symbol appears in the reminder text of a card, you have to pretend it doesn't appear in the card's text. The color identity rule says this way, so we must show our blind obedience to it by bowing down and pretending we cannot see the reminder text. Now, after playing Commander for a while, I also had to learn how hybrid cards work in this format.
Hybrid mana.
Hybrid cards. What are they? Do they glow? Can I touch them? Let's start off by defining the symbols that give them their name.
A hybrid mana symbol is a mana symbol that represents a cost that can be paid in one of two ways.
What are those two ways? Well, let's look at our boy Death Cult Rogue over here. Let's see. So his mana symbols are hybrid black-blue, so that means we can cast him with either one generic and two blue, one generic and two black, or one generic, one black, and one blue. Cool. Also, the border clearly shows this guy is black-blue. So now, if we apply this to the current color identity rules, Death Cult Rogue is a black-blue card, and therefore should only be played in a Commander deck that can have both black and blue cards. But wait, you hear me cry. That's not how that was designed. What? You say it in your childish, confused little voice. Let me explain.
The feud that broke the Planeswalker's back.
Okay, so recently our boy Marky Mark. No, not that one. No, not that one. Yes, that one. He got into a little discussion with the head of the Commander's Rules Committee. First, Sheldon Menery said this in response to someone saying that the rules for hybrid mana work different in Commander than they do in every other format.
The reason it's not the same isn't really that hybrid works differently. It's that those formats don't have color identity rules.
In response, Morrow, who has been the head designer for Magic since 2004, said this.
Here's the problem. Commander's take on hybrid contradicts the design function of it. Hybrid is specifically designed to be used in monocolored decks. Companion, as an example, was designed to be used in monocolored decks. I get it's also multicolored, but that's a byproduct.
Okay, so, real fast. Companion was, God rest its soul, this mechanic that let you kind of have a second commander by meeting specific requirements. They were really broken in other formats, so they had to change how they work. But that's not the point. The point is this. Lewis, for example, was supposed to be able to be a companion for any black or white deck that could meet its requirements. However, because of the way that color identity works in Commander, lures can only be used as a companion in a deck that has both black and white, which means that it can only be used for 2 commanders. If the rules for color identity match the way that hybrid mana works in other formats, then lures could instead be used for 35 commanders. The design intent of hybrid mana is not this and this, it's this or this. Well, this idea proposed by Mark Rosewater did not go unnoticed. For 3 whole freaking days, there were posts on the subreddit r/EDH that discussed these discrepancies. The most upvoted ones were against the idea of changing the rules. Why is Maro pushing for hybrid mana to be accepted in EDH?
There is more to be against hybrid mana than we don't like change.
I don't understand why people are getting worked up over hybrid mana. The color identity rule as it stands is so simple and silly. Now, this isn't the first time that Mark Rosewater has discussed the idea of changing the rules for how color identity works. It's also not the first time that the EDH committee has tried to discuss it themselves. It just so happens that this time, we're essentially seeing the rules committee and Wizards of the Coast butt heads. So I'm pretty sure that's the main reason why this one Twitter post got so much traction. And as we know, Twitter loves blood sports. Alright, let's break down some of the sweaty, juicy arguments against changing the color identity rules to work for hybrid mana. The arguments from the internet. These are all accumulated from discussions from the online Commander community around the time this all started.
The idea of revising the current color identity rules in order to allow more decks to run hybrid cards presents a slippery slope. If the RC allows hybrid cards, what's stopping them from allowing colorless hybrid and Phyrexian mana cards? Or split cards like Fire and Ice being playable in mono decks? I'm not very satisfied with just saying, well, you can allow some of these but not others. So what would the solution be?
Okay, there's a lot said in this argument, so we're gonna have to break it down. First, let's talk about slippery slopes. The biggest problem with slippery slope arguments is that they only work if the opposition is explicitly trying to do small things in order to fulfill a much larger agenda. For example, if I'm playing a Commander game with Arcades, it wouldn't be crazy for me to say, you know, if they destroy my walls, they're gonna kill me. Their agenda is to see me dead, and destroying all my walls is a pretty clear way to get there. But we aren't playing Magic, we're talking about rules. It is actually possible to allow just hybrid mana to work differently, without changing the way all these other mechanics work too. That's called drawing a line in the sand. For example, when the United States legalized gay marriage in 2015, some unhappy people on the opposing side claimed that gay marriage would lead to people marrying their horses. Yes, this is real. Now, of course, this is ridiculous, because we drew the line in the sand at marrying other people. Claiming that people are trying to change the color identity rule to work with all these other mechanics is just as ridiculous as claiming that people that wanted gay marriage were trying to allow for horse-human marriage. Now, let's talk about all the fun mechanics this argument is talking about, starting with colorless hybrid cards. Colorless hybrid mana looks like this. It's basically like normal hybrid mana, except you can pay 2 generic mana instead of the color shown here. In theory, if we made a new rule for color hybrid mana, we might have to include these guys. Some people interpret this as meaning a card like Besiege the Queen would be available in any deck. While I'm not primarily arguing for this, I'm not necessarily against it. Next is Phyrexian mana, which looks like this. Kinda cool. Its alternative costs only a hybrid mana, except the alternative is paid with your life. So Phyrexian mana cards are kinda like little vampires. The idea behind Phyrexian mana cards is to allow them to be used in any deck of any color. Right now, the color identity rules make the cards the color that the Phyrexian mana symbol represents. A rule change could change Phyrexian mana so that it works the way that it was originally designed. The issue, however, is that these cards are famously broken and can really dilute the color pipe. Unless someone can make a really great post explaining why birthing pods should be allowed for every deck, I'd be against this change. Next we have split cards. Ah yes, split cards. They're like regular cards, except you have to turn them sideways to read them. Amazing. These cards have 2 cards in them and they usually have different colors. Currently, the color identity is determined by all the colors found on the card. However, similar to hybrid cards, you don't necessarily need all the colors found on the card to cast it. But here's where I find these cards different than hybrid cards. To fully utilize them, you get to have every color found on the card, similar to a card like Samut, Twisted Descent. However, if someone can make a good argument why a card like Fire and Ice should be allowed in a mono blue or mono red deck, then I'd be willing to change my mind on this. The last point for this argument was this.
I'm not very satisfied with just saying, well, you can allow some of these but not others. So what would the solution be?
This argument is framing this as an all or nothing issue. Either we have hybrid mana allowed and all of this other stuff, or we have none of them work. But that's a really bad way to look at rules. The RC allowed companion to work even though it technically requires a sideboard, which currently has no use in this format. This didn't lead to sideboards being allowed, it just led to companions working. We can, and in fact usually should, make changes to Commander in moderation. We're able to look at mechanics on a case-by-case basis without making blanket statement rules to completely change how color identity works.
Changing the rules around the intent of a card seems like a dangerous precedent. Do we open up a huge pool of cards that don't work as intended and then start changing the rules so they do?
This is another slippery slope argument, and once again, there is no evidence that the opposition wants to make a change to every card. While yes, one of the arguments for why we should change hybrid mana cards is that they don't work as intended, no one is saying we want to change the way that every card works so that they work as intended. We don't want to change Charm Stray so you can have more than one copy in a singleton format just because it was intended to be played with 4. And we don't want to change Demonic Consultation just so that you have to choose a card in your deck so you can't choose Black Lotus to mill yourself and win with Lab Maniac.
Allowing hybrid cards to be playable in more decks will lead to more staples, which will homogenize the format.
I actually really like this argument. It requires me to spend several hours going through cards to see if it's a legitimate concern. First, what is a staple and what is this homo thing? Staples are any cards that are so good and so relevant to any decks that run their colors that you should probably be running them. Soul Ring is the most famous staple for Commander, for better or for worse. If it's not in every one of your decks, it really should be. The problem with staples is that they can lead to homogenization of the format. This basically means that you make every deck look the same because they're all running the same cards. Every black deck runs every black tutor, every green deck runs all the same creature tutors and ramp cards, and every blue deck runs Cyclonic Rift, Mystical Tutor, Ristic Study. God, I hate blue. Are you gonna pay 1? No. I'm gonna kill you next turn. Too bad. My hand is full of free counter spells. Now, the good part about staples is that they can make colors that normally suck less. Which colors suck? Red and white. Why do they suck? Well, it's because their effects are better for 1v1 20 life formats like Standard. Lightning Bolt, for example, is a must-have in a format like Modern, but is useless in Commander. It's also because red and white don't have very many copies of the few good cards that they have. White has Path to Exile, Source Plowshares, and Generous Gift to deal with creatures at instant speed. And then that's pretty much it. Red and white also don't tutor or draw cards very often, which means that the few good cards that they do have don't often appear in their games. They live in a circular world of bad. Why do they suck? Because they suck. Can they suck less? No, because they suck. Staples fix these problems in red and white. They gave them their own way to ramp, or to draw cards, or to deal with threats. Potentially, allowing more hybrid cards into more decks can add more staples to red and white. However, they might also add some staples to the other colors, which might homogenize the format. So let's see what would happen if we did add these cards. The good! Red would get to have Vexing Shursher and Guttural Response, both cards that allow them to say nope to the color of nope. Red would also get Cryptborn Horror to make a giant POS, Person of Shade, and Obosh for Heartless Sadestiku, Krinkle's Goblins, and the like. They'd also get Spite-Mare and Boros Reckoner for decks like Ashling the Pilgrim to deal even more damage to our opponent's charged bases. Red artifact decks like Duretti and Godric would also get a buff with a Saheeli to claim their favorite shiny toys. And the last one I could find was Zerda, which would buff Feldon, New Perforos, and Ashling. So Red would get some alright stuff. They'd get some cool new toys and a few new staples. Now let's see what White would get. This is where we see a pretty big buff. There's actually a lot more than what Red got, but here's the highlights. White control decks like 8 Tails McGee or Fox that is actually an enchantment could actually have a new win con for once with Azra's Electors. Just protect the filibusterers for 5 turns and get yourself a win. Token-based control decks like Elchnorn and White Krovax would get a second copy of Humility with Godhead of Awe. Your opponents don't get to have creatures, while you get to overwhelm them with buffed tokens. For even more tokens, Zafara would get both protection and extra flyers with Dovescape. Also, come on guys, it's birds. If you are interested in helping bigger flying things, a Lure Dawnbreaker deck could wipe the board, then in response, use a Cauldron Haze so that only her angels survive. Teshar could also get some additional recursion action with Debtor's Knell. You could even return your opponent's Sheoldred. Onto my favorite card that would go nicely into my own Odric Lunar Commercial deck is Waves of Aggression. This can really go into any white deck that wants to attack a lot, but this thing would seriously help out white. Not only do white armies, aka Warmies, now get the potential to double their power, the Retrace ability lets you do it in later turns, or even more than once, if you got the mana and the land in hand. Moving on from the flashy, cool stuff over to the staples, we get a couple of no big deal artifact and enchantment removal spells with Nature's Chant and Sunring Growth. This may not seem like much, but right now, white usually has to pay more than 2 mana to get rid of artifacts and enchantments. Having functional reprints for white is always good. Next, we've got Mercy Killing. It would give white a way to kill a creature at instant speed, or generate a bunch of tokens by killing the biggest creature on an opponent's end step. Sarah Avatar, anyone? The final staple is Mirror Weave. White decks could turn a board of 1/1 tokens into a board of Sundering Titans, or turn an opponent's Crater Hoof win into a board of Walls of Omens, which seems kind of playable. Now, while all these cards for red and white are both based and epic, there are a few hybrid cards that might cause some problems.
The bad!
Privileged Position would give non-white green decks access to a second copy of Ascetism, or better. If you had blue in, you could copy the card and all your things have hexproof. This can't win by itself, but it can lead to frustrating board states. Ashiok Dreamrender would let mono blue and mono black decks completely shut off their opponent's tutors and nuke all of their graveyards until Ashiok is dead. Right now, there are CEDH decks that sometimes run them. I expect that if they were allowed in more decks, they might be used more. I also think this would actually affect casual EDH tables too, because of how low cost Ashiok is and how much casual tables seem to struggle with planeswalkers. Just attack it, guys. It dies when you attack it. The last problem card is Fiend Artisan. God, what a freak. This would give both mono green and mono black a new tutor. You do have to wait a whole turn to start doing stuff, and you have to have another creature to sacrifice, but still, it's a repeatable tutor. It's gross. And it's gross. Now I know you might be thinking, but you're wrong. These 3 cards do not automatically invalidate all of the other cards we were talking about. And you know why? It's because the ban list is a thing. We can ban things. We could do that the whole time. Oh my god. I'll eventually be making a whole video on why the rules committee needs to stop being scared of banning cards. But until then, here's a couple of good examples of why allowing some cool new things wouldn't ruin the format. When they put in Companion, they realized that Lutri was going to be overpowered. God, why does this guy keep talking about Companion? His Companion requirement is basically, are you following the rules of Commander, and you have both blue and red in your deck? Well then, step right this way to Broken Town, my man. What they could have done is say, nope, no Companions, this little bastard shows that they're all broken. Instead, the RC banned Lutri and said the rest were fine. You can add in cool new stuff, while being careful to only ban the problem cards.
Conclusion.
We've gone through the facts and the arguments, and the facts that supposedly back up those arguments. And it seems like the opposition only has unfounded slippery slopes and conjecture. Making the rules change to hybrid mana will actually make players who want to play red and white have a better play experience by adding new staples to them. The few good cards given to the other colors aren't too good, but if they are, they can still be banned. It seems the only argument against hybrid mana rules being changed in Commander is a dislike for change. Now, what would the wording look like for this rule? Here's an idea for it that I stole from an old Reddit post.
When constructing a commander deck, you may ignore any part of a card's color identity solely given to it by one, but not both, halves of a hybrid mana symbol.
Now, I don't know if this is the best wording or the best way to go about changing this rule, but for now, this is the rule change I'd be fighting for. If you want to fight me IRL, or not IRL, or you just want to discuss this stuff, just leave a comment. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe so that you know when my next video is coming out. Well, that's all I've got for today. Hopefully by the next time you see me, your friend's mono white deck will be mirror weaving everything into set robots in response to a board wipe so that everyone can draw some cards. Bye.